Hello everybody, and welcome to this next video recording in the series from the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight. I've been with RICS for nearly 11 years now, and I sit within the standards, regulatory and thought leadership part of the organisation. And my role is to look at the whole impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. With over 130,000 members working worldwide, right across the property life cycle and across rural, land, commercial, residential, alternative assets and infrastructure. Clearly, it's a very, very broad landscape upon which data and tech is having a positive influence on the way our members in the profession work. And today, I'm really happy to have Jordan join me from one of our partners, Life Proven. So, Jordan, do join me.
Andrew, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you on. Now, I always like to start these conversations with sort of almost avoiding the bits and bytes and having a bit of a kind of discussion about the people and the teams and the backstory. So it'd be great to hear both your personal kind of backstory from your chartered QS role to also hear about the founding of Life Proven. But please do give us a bit of a personal backstory, if you would, Jordan.
Yeah, sure. So property's always been in my family. I've always been fascinated by it. My father was in property when I was younger, so it's always something that I've grown up and been interested by. Short story was a building surveyor came to our house to do a survey when I was a kid. He turned up in quite a flash car, and I said to my dad, "What's his job?" And he said, "He's a chartered surveyor." So I think that probably had something to do with it, although I don't have the car that he had. But yeah, so my background's a chartered quantity surveyor. I've been chartered for 10 years this year. And I guess I've always been looking at how I can push my influence on the development process and where I've been. And towards the most recent part of my career, I was fulfilling a development management role. So development director on a couple of schemes for an in-house developer I was working for. And there was just an innate, I suppose, desire to really look at maximising the role and the function that I had in that project. And a particular scheme that really changed my thinking was a student scheme in Bristol that I was actually in charge of delivering on behalf of this developer. And the university that I was trying to agree a lease with flagged an issue with student mental health and wellbeing, and that was a huge factor that they were having to deal with. And this was at the back end of 2016, early 2017. And long story short is, as they said, how are you addressing these factors within the scheme that you're proposing that we take a lease on? And we said, well, we're not. And at that time, there was a very different balance between, you know, what things do you put into a property to improve mental health, and how do you balance the objectives of the end user and the social impact with the profit and development objectives of the client and the viability of a scheme. And I guess that was kind of the fulcrum for me to start my own business. And I co-founded Life Proven with a colleague, Adam Hines, who I worked with at the time. And we just had a desire to innovate the delivery of property by using wellbeing as the collective measure, both environmentally and socially, to drive those delivery changes.
So how would you kind of summarize Life Proven as a company in terms of the team and you know, what it's delivering?
Yeah, so Life Proven was founded first and foremost as a wellbeing property company. Early days in the process of us creating the business, we formed a data process, and I can go into a bit more detail, but to measure the impact built environments have on end user health and wellbeing using data science. And that data science is then used to help drive cost, development, design, and operational decisions, but to provide an objective framework from which clients can make decisions. And then from that is we've then started most recently to blend our experience and our services as project manager, quantity surveyor with that, so we have a direct delivery input for clients as well.
Now you mentioned sort of, you know, mental health as a very obvious output here, but you know, help us understand, you know, the various challenges in the sector and the industry that you want to help them overcome. So, you know, as I say, mental health, very obvious and a very important one, but what other issues are you seeing that actually your approach is helping to solve?
It's a good question. I think in terms of our early objective was to really create a measure that you could frame a development process by understanding how it was going to impact an end user. And what we found is that actually that's helping very very well to drive the commerciality of getting a scheme delivered. And obviously COVID massively accelerated everyone's thinking around wellbeing and the importance of our health. And we found that, and I think as an industry, we found that those properties that positively responded to people's lifestyles, whether that was flexibility and whether that provided support to mental health through calming environments, whether that improved your physical activity through a building, but also things like anxiety and depression. And we found that social connections during COVID were probably one of the biggest impacts. And we did a student campaign last year that really identified just how much people have been impacted by the lack of social interaction with one another, and that's massively driven by having those spaces that people can interact and can be part of. So, but certainly we found that wellbeing is a massive performance tool for property to really understand. You know, ultimately we build buildings for people to be in and to occupy, and there has to be a direct link between that building and how it's going to respond. And I think COVID is, going back to that, has really driven people's mindset to think, unless it responds to the needs of the people that I'm actually delivering this for, it's not actually a successful building from a business case perspective. But also I think it's the long-term resilience piece of that building, and that's something that we've seen is being really considered in the last sort of 6 to 8 months, really.
No, I mean, you've already mentioned COVID, and it's hard now to have one of these discussions without talking either about the effect of COVID, the pandemic, on people's view of how real estate should be configured, designed, used, but also in the same breath, we're continually being challenged on how we can record, report, integrate the whole ESG discussion into real estate now. Could you almost help us understand how you're using data to kind of support these kind of changes in the environment? Because people are obviously looking at demonstrating both social value, social impact, but also, dare I say it, from your perspective as a QS, it comes down to really kind of quite detailed data, isn't it, in terms of measuring the effects, but also how that reflects back into the design choices. Yeah,
and I guess it comes back to the old QS adage, is that you can't manage what you can't measure. And I mean, probably actually interesting is, to give you an example, is one of our very early pilot projects with Horsham District Council, and they had some real challenges. This leads into the measurement and the social impact piece, but they had some real challenges in their temporary accommodation portfolio, where their whole objective is to get people through onto permanent housing as quickly as possible. But they were finding they were seeing increase in duration of people's stay. They were having increase of complaints, damages, and it was driving a real negative impact on the council's kind of property model. And they operate around 130 temporary accommodation units, which is quite a lot for them. And all they kept doing is saying the only thing we can think of doing is creating better environments and looking at building new apartments. But they were using a very traditional model that just resulted in the same challenges coming through. And they said, we really don't know what to do. So we're very fortunate to be in a position that we can say, well, let's trial this, let's pilot this with your accommodation. And we measured through our data science survey that was issued to every resident across their portfolio to rate their satisfaction with their accommodation, with its location, the amenities, its environment, operation and management, and then to also ask them questions that set out internationally validated health and wellbeing measures against Warwick Mental Health Scale and the World Health Organization Quality of Life Index. And through data science, we're able to draw the direct correlations between the impact certain elements of their buildings or the way it was being managed was having on their health and well-being. And that completely flipped the understanding of, or the perception of, what the council thought the problems were. And they were that the impact of noise between residents was something that they hadn't quite appreciated, the poor acoustic performance of some properties. Access to natural daylight was really poor. But when we actually went into properties, we found that the council hadn't provided curtains or blinds, so people were kind of creating their own temporary makeshift sort of curtains for privacy. So there were some really quick, simple fixes. But what we identified is actually these are the areas through data that we can directly make targeted decisions on and make targeted interventions. And going back to your point around using data to make those sort of value-driven decisions, is that actually that presented a very objective framework by which the council could say, this is how we're going to start allocating our budget for the next year, and this is what we're going to look for. And actually, we found that because a temporary accommodation is very transient, there's a lot of people coming and going over time. The design of the accommodation or the management of it wasn't correct. You know, it had a communal garden, but that was never used by people because people needed a bit more privacy. The focus of the community was more focused around each building rather than the collective, and because people weren't there long enough, they couldn't form connections with the community. So we were able to really identify and really drill into these are some of the key issues that must be dealt with at kind of a RIBA stage 7, and then that information was presented to the architect, to the property management team, to say, going forwards, these are where we need to put our budget, and this is where we need to put our focus. And what that actually did is that provided a really clear framework by which the council could measure its success over time. So they could redistribute the survey sort of 12 months later or 6 months later and measure directly those things. And I mean, there's quite a good statistic, as they saved £100,000 during the previous year on damages as a result of some of the issues that were identified. The average length of stay reduced by 4 weeks, from I think it was from 60 down to 54. But also there was an increased rate of people being accepted onto permanent accommodation, which we were really pleased to see actually that those data-driven decisions were really driving, I suppose, value for the council. And I think obviously just talking around the measurement process, this wellbeing measure is something that we've been adopting since our formation in 2018, very much for a pilot study in the first 18 months. But what we found is that going back to COVID is that this was suddenly a tool that people were able to use to demonstrate their social impact using health and wellbeing as a measure. And as the agenda for ESG probably filtered down a lot quicker from you know the institutional level and from the funding level down to a project level, we found that actually your true social impact is how your development is impacting the very people that are in that. And by using internationally validated measures, you're able to very robustly say, this is how our assets are working, and if they're not working, we know why they're not working. And that's something that we're very proud of, and that's something that we've been able to very easily link to a delivery model for clients in traditional kind of quantity surveying project management.
So Jordan, tell me about the kind of development of Project Proven, your sister company, because you seem to have obviously taken an awful lot of learnings from the Life Proven side and move that almost to the next logical step. Talk us through what that looks like in terms of Project Proven.
Yeah, sure. So last year we were predominantly focused on Life Proven, and that's very much grown into the front end strategy setting for clients, and we're working with them, and that's something that kind of came about through providing them really clear, objective KPIs around how they measure social impact. We were then delving deeper into their ESG strategies, a lot of our clients, and realised that actually the environmental piece and the governance piece wasn't as robust as what they were setting for their social. So we've been transitioning the company to start considering a lot closer the environmental objectives and the governance piece. And I'd say as property professionals, governance is a massive part of being a surveying practice and a regulated practice, having robust appointments and very clear contractual terms. So that's something we've naturally just dropped into very easily. But we found that when we were setting clients' ESG strategies at both a corporate level and a development level, that we presented them with the roadmap by which to deliver it. We then didn't really have the vehicle by which to help them say, right, we can now deliver that. And the property industry is very traditional, and it needs to know where and what box you fit in. And we found that because we were doing consultancy services in a different, not under the name of Life Proven, we felt that we could offer clients the ability to not only deliver something through a traditional PMQS model, but actually overlay the ESG, overlay the wellbeing data to actually drive some really kind commercially valuable kind of processes that actually linked with their overall outcome. And we found that when we were presenting ESG strategies and wellbeing strategies to clients and their delivery teams, it kind of just dropped off a cliff as to how that would be implemented and how that would be seen right through the development process. And we felt that actually we're a pretty good custodian of being able to take that all the way through. And we've just recently done that with a commercial client in London. It's a private family-run commercial landlord, and they've got a new asset just in the city fringe. It's about 20,000 square foot refurb, but their whole corporate ESG strategy that they set and that they're pushing for is to be net zero carbon in operation. That's the massive focus for them, to have an asset which is going to be resilient to future changes and actually isn't going to be redundant within the next 5 to 10 years. Focus on the thermal efficiency of the envelope, but then is also to really focus on the health and wellbeing credentials of that asset. So they're looking at creating some outdoor space through terraces, increasing the size of window apertures, activating the staircase is where we visually push people through the stair core of building into the lift, so it encourages movement and interaction between different floors. And what we've done is we've said that, well, these are the objectives of you as a client. This is how we can translate those into your building, but then this is how we can then ensure that they're covered within the cost plan, so that you know that actually this is still a viable scheme. But what we can do using the hierarchy of our data is be able to say, well actually increasing the size of the windows is going to have a massive impact on health and well-being, but actually this is the cost impact. But if actually we find that viability is being tested, we can start to look at the hierarchy of impact on someone's health and go, right, we know that interior design is going to have a lesser impact than outdoor space, so actually maybe we'll pare this back and focus on these things. And we found that through that kind of continual development cycle, we've been able to advise the agent so that they can start preparing the information for the marketing of an asset, but then the client can also start reporting to their investors, this is how we're meeting our ESG strategy. So Project Proven has kind of really, we felt, has plugged the gap that our clients needed, and we found that quite fortunately there's the Project Proven is being appointed because of its relationship with Life Proven, and then Life Proven is very much at the front end of property that the clients are then saying, I would now like you to help me deliver this. So it's a natural sort of transition and next step for us, really.
Indeed. So what are your plans across both sister companies for this year and beyond, Jordan?
I guess for us is we have a massive objective to be known as an innovative consultancy that's really driving value change across the industry, and that's very much driven by the ESG piece and the ESG agenda. Life Proven is continuously evolving, is continuously growing and changing in terms of the dynamics of ESG. I mean, as you know, Andrew, there's no kind of set standard that the industry is adopting and the industry is using. And probably in the quarter of last year, we kind of coined the phrase with our clients is be your own benchmark. Don't worry about benchmarking yourself to other standards at the moment, but benchmark yourself on where you want to go, where your business is trying to, and what it's trying to achieve, and then measure that against where you were last year. And I think that's quite a credible piece, and it's very bespoke and personalized. So our focus this year is to just continue that work that we're doing to drive the strategy setting for ESG and how that can be implemented. And a big piece for us this year is actually the continual measurement of assets. So we measure at the moment for a couple of clients on a reoccurring basis the social impact of their buildings using our wellbeing measure. But we're developing that further to pick up the environmental piece through building sensor technology, and then also using that information to sit with the asset as almost like an ESG passport. So we're working with 1 or 2 commercial clients at the moment to actually create a passport that sits with the building to demonstrate this is how it was designed, this is the objectives that were set, this is how it's measuring year on year against those objectives, and these are the changes that we've made to ensure that that's always kept at an optimum. And that's something for us that we feel very passionate about, you know, having that level of understanding around ESG and in property. But something that we felt for this year is, and it can be considered a little bit of a dirty word, but it's actually commercializing sustainability. And I think there's always the two kind of contradict each other, is making money and profiting from being sustainable, but actually ultimately for ESG to succeed and for the objectives that we must achieve in planetary carbon reduction and emissions reduction and health and well-being, there has to be an incentive to a developer. There has to be some material impact that actually this is going to make your asset perform better. It might be worth more in the market. It might drive higher rents. It's going to be resilient in the next 10, 15 years when, you know, against those assets that aren't meeting those objectives. And a big piece I haven't actually touched on is something this year that we've been working, certainly the beginning part of this year, is our ESG strategies have been helping clients to achieve cheaper development finance. So we've been working with the likes of Urban Splash, working with on their fund, company called Urban Village, and then most recently for a smaller developer, our strategy has gone into Octopus for development finance, and they've actually achieved 2 basis points cheaper development finance from having a credible strategy that they can demonstrate that they're implementing. So there are some real, you know, key objectives and key drivers. So yeah, this year is very much building upon what we've been doing and evolving it further, and having a greater influence on larger schemes as well, and that's something that we're pushing. Yeah.
Indeed, but you know, it is an important point that people understand that, you know, sustainability doesn't mean that you don't have a profitable asset, or an asset that, as you say, will perform in the market well, and indeed will probably, as you say, have the ability to perform better than other assets because it is sustainable. So it hopefully should be a virtuous circle that well-built, well-designed, well-run assets should command, you know, good market rents in both the commercial and residential sector. So I mean, putting your sort of your crystal ball on the table, what are your thoughts of the whole future of ESG and well-being in property, both, you know, commercial and residential? Because clearly it's a incredibly important topic at the moment, but as you say, there are, you know, there's perhaps a lack of consistency in standards. There's still this perhaps a difficulty in persuading some stakeholders to invest in it, and as you're doing, you're proving that actually with the data you can make those decisions. You can understand, perhaps trade-off is the wrong word, but you can understand how those decisions impact on well-being and make the right kind of decisions still within an envelope of cost.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as you say, crystal ball, and probably from where we see certainly our own future and what we're driving and other clients, we have seen a massive uptick in clients that have never been interested in this stuff in the last 6 months, and I think they're suddenly starting to see some value. I think we're of the view that benchmarking for ESG is probably not necessarily the right thing to do as an overall, but within kind of the remits of environmental and social and governance, there might be some objectives that are met. But we see this as something that has to be embedded within the profession as well. And obviously we've spoken about this before, but it isn't a bolt on to a service. It has to be ingrained in every development decision. And I think that's where we see the industry going, is that it's not just considered a nice to have, and it's not a marketing tool that will quickly run out, but this will be seen as a real performance benchmark and measure by which clients appoint consultants, by which you look through the acquisition process of an asset based on its data and based on its measure that it's had. And obviously that will be a separator in the market for a while, but we see that will become the norm, and that will become something that is whether imposed by legislation or will be something that's driven at a consumer level. But you know, we've had the guys in the team at Life Proven have come from a traditional QS and PM background. The big driver for them joining us is they want to be looking at things further. They want to be imparting things further, and see that's something that's been driven heavily by you guys with the recent guidance paper that's been issued, and that's exactly the right journey that we see. So but data, I think, is absolutely the factor that is going to drive this, and being able to look at objectively how assets are performing and their performance. And it can't just be we've designed it, we've finished it at PC and that's done. It will be something which sits with that asset long term to say, okay, it isn't performing, or yes it is. So, and I think in probably just very quickly is the next 5, probably 10 years, there's going to be a huge acceleration towards the delivery of assets that are sustainable, and we find that the understanding of that is still very slow, I suppose, in our clients and even some consultants. And we're working with a project team at the moment, and the client says, I want to construct it with zero carbon bricks, and we're saying, well, that's good. It's a huge cost. The bricks come from Holland, and actually the value for your business is an operational net zero carbon piece. The embodied piece at the moment isn't viable for you to achieve, but there's some roadmap as a measure by which you start to track those things. So yeah, I think it's massively exciting. I think it's a huge opportunity for us to, as a collective industry and as a profession, to drive value to clients, to our service, but also to meet those objectives that we must all collectively meet on sustainability and the net zero carbon goals. So.
Indeed, and I guess ultimately it comes back, although we've been discussing data, it comes back to the well-being of people in these assets, that ultimately these are places where we all live, work, play, travel on. You know, it's so important that we put people back into property in that way, I think, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And we're very close to signing heads of terms with a build to rent operator. We're creating a partnership around a build to rent wellbeing index, which really links the commercial performance of a building versus its impact on someone's health and well-being. And that's something that we're very excited to create this year. And I think that they've been very hungry to understand, how do these buildings we manage impact the people that we're trying to serve. And you're right, you can have probably the most sustainable asset in the world, but if it doesn't respond to the person that's going to be in it, it's not successful. And that's something that has to drive first. And actually, just very quickly, as a sort of anecdotal, is when we first started Life Proven, we were working on some micro apartments that had folding furniture and everything. And inherently, the smaller the property through research, the less the reduction in the quality of life of the occupant. And something that we were really intrigued by was actually looking at sustainability. Buildings in the future need to get smaller, just because of urban sprawl, and the density of living probably needs to increase it by some margin. That's obviously, there's a counter to that with COVID and having outdoor space, but we found that unless you could improve the quality of life of someone in a building through its design, through its management, through its operation, it didn't matter where it was. It didn't matter in terms of its sustainable credentials. That wouldn't be a desirable asset to be in, and it wouldn't function. And that sort of was always led us to push the person first, the well-being of the person first, to really, because I think then you can start to look at how that building performs environmentally. But obviously the two are very interlinked. So.
Indeed. Well, it's been fascinating to hear your story so far and what you're doing at the moment and your views on the future. But for the moment, thanks very much, Jordan. But I look forward to catching up again soon.
Thank you, Andrew.